Welcome to the She Spoke webinar with Kathy McMillan and Manuela Bernardi. Kathy is a nationally certified American Sign Language interpreter, writer, teacher, librarian, and storyteller. She is the author of the board books Meet Us for Signs and Meet Us Day with Familias. She is also the co-author of She Spoke, 14 Women Who Raised Their Voices and Changed the World, which we will be talking about today. She is the author of a young adult novels, Sword and Verse, Dagger and Coin, and 9 books for parents, teachers, librarians, and educators, including Little Hands and Big Hands, Children's and Adults Signing Together. That is Kathy. And Manuela is a film and TV writer based in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, where she was born and raised. She has collaborated on award-winning feature films and has written on shows for TV Global, TBS, GNT, Multi-Show, and the History Channel. Her screenplay for the short film The Healing Tree won USC's Peter Stark Special Project Grant and went on to be selected for Kane's Short Film Corner. With a BA in journalism from PUC Rio, Manuela got her MFA in writing for screen and television from USC in Los Angeles, which she attended on a Fulbright CIPS scholarship. So that is Manuela and Kathy, and I will let them take it over. Thanks, guys.
Hello, everybody. We're so happy to be here to talk about the book we're so proud of, She Spoke, 14 Women Who Raised Their Voices and Changed the World. Isn't it pretty? It's so pretty. You know, it's funny when you're writing a book, you just have the words. And when you're not an illustrator, as we are not illustrators, you just kind of hope that it will turn into something beautiful. And then that comes that day when you get it in your hands and it's like what Familias does with books is just incredible. And it's all sparkly and padded and makes sounds. And as many of you know, this one has something special because it has the audio panel, which you can press the button and hear the women's voices. So we thought we would start by just sharing some of the stories of some of the women in the book. As the title implies, there are 14 women in the book, but we thought we'd each talk about a couple of them that really made an impression on us and share some fun facts with them. So Manuela, I'll let you start. Who do you want to tell us about first?
Oh, when we started writing the book, there were some women that I didn't know because they had to be speaking in English. So there were some American women. And one of the women that Kathy said were awesome, but I had never heard about was Shirley Chisholm. Let me find her here. Wait, where is she? Here she is. Wait, Shirley Chisholm. And I didn't know anything about her. And I was like, are you sure we should have her in the book? But then I started researching her and I fell in love with her. First, because she was tiny. I'm also tiny. So the fact that tiny women can change the world is amazing to me. And she definitely had this spunk to challenge age-old traditions, which is... So she was an amazing student. She went to college and then she ran childcare centers. And then she started realizing that the community needed so much and she could do more if she were in politics. So she ran for Congress, but she had no support. It was the 60s. So she had no support from anyone, being a Black woman. So she just ran with no support. Her slogan was unbought and unbossed. And she just owned it. And she was the first Black woman to be in Congress. And then she ran for president, even though she knew she couldn't win, just because she wanted for people to see her in that position and for people to know that it was possible. And the fact that she just ran knowing that she couldn't win, and she did it, and she got 10% of the vote in the 70s. And she was amazing. She inspired so many people. And she always said that how she wanted to be remembered. She said, I'd like them to say that Shirley Chisholm had guts. So Shirley Chisholm had guts. So she was amazing.
So why don't you play the clip for us? Let's hear Shirley.
Yeah. I believe that we are smart enough to correct our mistakes. I believe we are intelligent enough to recognize the talent, energy, and dedication which all Americans, including women and minorities, have to offer.
That was when she was running for president. She's awesome.
Shirley Chisholm is pretty awesome. And so one of my favorite things about the book, other than the audio panel, is the fact that we got to write about these women, write a bio, but then we also had a little piece over here this one is called Joanne's Voice, but that one would have been called Shirley's Voice, that tells you where and when they said the thing that you hear on the audio clip, and it has the full text there, so it's accessible for those who can't hear the clips. And then there's a section called Your Turn to Speak Up, where we have some discussion questions. And we really worked hard on those discussion questions. We wanted them to be something that parents and teachers and caregivers could use to interact with kids, to really get them thinking about that person's life and how it relates to their own life, and how the inspirations of that person's life can affect them. And one of the things we talked about with Shirley Chisholm is that winning isn't always the goal. Sometimes there's something more important than winning. And Shirley Chisholm was very clear about that part of the reason she was running was to make it easier for the next Black woman who wanted to run for political office. And another person that I think really exemplifies that attitude is Dr. Joanne Liu. And she is an Asian Canadian doctor. She's a pediatrician. She is now the former president of Doctors Without Borders. But she grew up in Quebec City her parents were Asian immigrants. And so she was in the French-speaking suburbs of Quebec City. At first, she wanted to be a hockey player, but then when she was 13 years old, she found out about Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, and that just inspired her and changed her whole path going forward. And so she really wanted to work with Doctors Without Borders, so she decided to get her medical degree. She then joined MSF, Doctors Without Borders. She was on her first mission. She was the only physician in a camp of, I'm going to check the number, 40,000 refugees. So she was practicing medicine without running water, with very few supplies, the only physician in a camp of 40,000 refugees. She worked with tsunami survivors, earthquake victims, different people all over the world. And she had her heart set on becoming the international president of Doctors Without Borders. And so she ran and lost, and she was just devastated, but she didn't give up. She went back and got more training, like made herself even more qualified. And then in 2013, she was elected and did serve as the international president of Doctors Without Borders. During that first year, I'm going to hold her up again because you got to look at these beautiful illustrations by Catherine Onesta. During her first year as international president of Doctors Without Borders, she had the responsibility of letting the world know about the Ebola outbreak in Africa. And it really was due to her efforts and Doctors Without Borders efforts that came to international attention. So as I've been doing programs during the pandemic, this is one of the profiles I really like to highlight because, we are in a pandemic. And so she was dealing with a different outbreak at that time, but I think the things that she says really affect and resonate with kids and the things that they are doing and thinking and feeling now. So I'm going to play her clip. This was a clip from a commencement speech that she gave at Barnard College in New York in 2017. So I have to hold it up like this so you can see it. Actually, Manuela, do you mind? It seems like it plays better with your version since you don't have a headset on. Why don't you play Joanne Liu's clip for us?
If we only assist others when we think our own interests are at stake, we'll likely act too late. But if we choose to act out of the belief and basic logic that our own well-being is intertwined with, dependent upon the well-being of others, we will make better choices. Not perfect, but better.
And that's something that really runs throughout her work.
Yeah,
not perfect, but better. So who else do you want to tell us about? Why don't you tell us about another?
Someone that I've always admired, and that's completely different from Shirley Chisholm because I already knew about her before we wrote the book, but just knowing more about her story just made it even greater. It's Jane Goodall.
Dr. Jane Goodall.
Dr. Jane Goodall, that's very important. She was always a curious child. So as a child, she would go to the hen to see how chicken laid eggs, and she would disappear. Her parents would be looking for her. But even though she was super curious and super interested in animals, she couldn't afford to go to college. But she did manage to go to Kenya, and there she met a famous anthropologist who hired her as his secretary. And she was so dedicated to her job that she got a job she had the opportunity to do a research study about chimpanzees in Tanzania. Tanzania, right? Yes.
Tanzania.
Tanzania. And when she went, she was about to go, she realized that she couldn't go by herself because the reserve wouldn't let young women go by themselves to the reserve. So her mom had to go to Tanzania with her so she could do the research. And it really paid off because she was great at it. And then she turned her sights to gorillas. That's when she observed them for years, realized they engage in plant warfare and they use tools, and she revolutionized everything. She was in many documentaries, etc. And what I love about her, and she's so quiet and she's so soft-spoken, and she just likes to be with animals, observing them. But when she realized that the forest was disappearing, she realized that she needed to speak up. And I think that's important for all women to know that even though we don't like speaking up, sometimes we have to. And I think she's inspiring for that reason. So we can hear her speak up.
I could go back to living in the forest, which is what I love. But how can I go and live in the forest when it's disappearing? And I feel that maybe there's something I can do by inspiring others to take action so that we create, hopefully, a critical mass of people who think differently.
It's awesome.
She's amazing. And she's in her late 80s. She was born in 1934. So she's about, 86? And still travels all over speaking up for the environment. Incredible.
Inspiring.
So one of the things I loved about Dr. Jane Goodall's story was the women supporting women. And that's something we found over and over again in these stories, that very often when there was a woman who succeeded, it's because there was another woman behind her supporting her, just like Jane Goodall's mother was there going to Tanzania with her. And we saw that again and again and again. And the next one I'm going to share is someone else who really brought women together for change. And that is Lima Bowie. She grew up in Liberia. And when she was a teenager, a brutal 14-year civil war broke out. She witnessed lots of horrifying things. She volunteered as a social worker, specifically working with child soldiers and kind of helping them, children who have been forced to fight, and basically helping them with their trauma. When it was 2002, she had a dream. A voice in a dream told her, get the women together, pray for peace. So she brought women of all faiths together to pray in public as a form of protest, to draw attention to the suffering of the people of Liberia. And it worked. It worked really well. And eventually, she actually was brought to speak to these various warlords, and she was supposed to speak with her back to them because she wasn't supposed to confront them, but she turned right around. She wasn't having that. And she and the women, actually, the various warlords were in a hotel and they were negotiating peace, negotiating a settlement, a stoppage of the fighting. And the women went and basically camped out in the hallways and wouldn't let them leave until they negotiated peace. And she actually received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2011 for her work. And she continues to promote women's leadership and peace around the world. So let me show you her. Her speech was also from a commencement address at Barnard College. Oh, actually, Manuela, can you play it for us?
Yes.
This is what she said to the graduates in 2013.
Refuse to be in the shadows as you step out into this light. Don't be shy, no matter how crazy it seems to you. That crazy idea may just be the solution for some crazy global or local problem.
And I love that she talks about how crazy the idea might seem to you, because I feel like as women, we tend to judge our own thoughts a lot, and we tend to self-censor. So the fact that she's just like, be bold, be brave, just go. It's awesome.
That sounds familiar. That's a quote from my novel, sort of verse. That's why she said that. That's funny. Thank you, Manuela. So I guess the question we get most often is, where did the idea for this book come from? And the reactions, people are either really confused by the panel, or they think, wow, that's the coolest thing in the world. And even if they're confused, they usually hear the voices and then say, wow, that's the coolest thing in the world. And one of the things we found is the book really appeals to different age ranges because of that. It's written for ages 8 to 12, just about, but much younger children get into it because of the voices. They can access it. And of course, the beautiful, beautiful illustrations and the whole package. But they can also, for example, mix and match. They can say, oh, who is that person? So I know one of the things I've loved seeing is when parents will have videos of their kids who've memorized the quotes. And we had a video of a 4-year-old performing the Abby Wambach quote, which is it's just so amazing to think that these voices, and women's voices are just not as recorded, not as shared as much as men's voices, but these voices are getting to those little ears. These inspiring words are getting into those little ears, and you get to hear their voices unfiltered, which is amazing to me. And I wish I could take credit for the idea, but I cannot. So the initial idea for this format actually came from a man, a feminist. David Miles, who is the former creative director at Familius, actually came up with this idea. He does a lot of creative stuff. He actually was responsible for the design of my book, Nita's First Signs, and this series, which uses this really creative slide out format. And so he was the one who came up with the idea, and he wanted it to be something that would come out for Women's History Month that would really highlight the voices of women. And this is something Manuela and I have talked about too, that you could do a bunch of speeches by men, but it just wouldn't have the same impact, given that women's voices have been suppressed throughout history. It really is more impactful. Go ahead.
In fact, when he came to us with the idea, he wanted the book to be called She Spoke and the World Listened. And when we started to work on the book, we just told him, David, that sounds awesome, but it doesn't sound true, because often the world doesn't listen. So we thought it should be called like Women Who Raise Their Voices and Change the World, whether the world wanted to or not.
Whether the world wanted to listen or not. Yeah, and that part of the reason that they changed the world is because they did speak up, even though they weren't being heard.
And they had support from other women, and they tried again, even though they failed, because as women, we're going to fail a lot. It's just going to happen.
Yes. And so anyway, he brought me the idea, and I think it was April or May. And the goal was to have it out for the following March for Women's History Month, which if any of you who have done anything in publishing know, that's not how publishing works. It's a very long process. So for this book, the goal was to have it completed by September, have the writing completed by September. And typically with an illustrated book, you would have the writer work on the text, and then when it's all complete, it goes to the illustrator, and then the illustrator does their part, and then it comes together as a book. But in this case, because it was a bit of an accelerated process, we had finalized the women in a month or two, and the illustrator was working as we were working on the text. So there was some interplay more than usual. And because of the short turnaround, I said, I need a co-author, and I can't think of anybody better than my friend Manuela Bernardi. And Manuela is going to tell you a little bit about our history together.
No, it's really funny because we've known each other for 20 years? 20 years. I was 15 and I was writing fan fiction and I sent my fan fiction to a website that was super cool, but they only accepted people after they had been beta read, which is basically like edited and had people look over and give notes. So they would pair authors with professors who would go through the stories. So they paired me with Kathy, and we didn't know each other. We didn't talk. We didn't see photos of each other. We only knew each other from notes and writing. And then we started chatting over email, and we had like a meeting of souls in a way. And we lost touch. And at some point I added her on Facebook, like 7 years later or something.
Something like that.
And
yeah, you went off to college and I went off and had a baby.
Yeah, and I was about to go on my MFA in the United States I was living in Rio, in Brazil, all this time. And then I basically, she was writing a book and she needed an editor. And I was like, wow, I can do that for you. I can do for you what you did for me. So our relationship was always based on writing and making each other's writing better and like helping each other bring your voices to light, which I think is super fitting with this book. This book is really the culmination of what we can do.
Yeah, in fact, we didn't meet in person until you came for your Fulbright orientation, right? And it happened to be on the East Coast. I'm in Baltimore. So we got to spend the weekend together, and then I got to visit you when you were out in California. And you came to Baltimore for the launch of Sword and Verse. You were here for it. She got to experience her first snowfall.
Yeah.
That was something. So yeah, it's been quite a journey. So talking about women supporting each other, that's what this relationship is. So one of the most important things in the book was obviously finding the audio clips. And a lot of times when people ask us, you know, why did you pick the women that are in the book? Why didn't you pick this other person? Well, it all started with the audio clips because we had to have a clip that worked before a woman could be placed in the book. So obviously somebody from, you know, ancient times is not going to be in the book. Somebody from, you know, the 1700s is not going to be in the book. We had to have usable audio clips. The oldest audio clip we have been able to find is from the late 1800s. And even when you find older clips, like there was one from like 1904 that was Christabel Pankhurst, and who is a British suffragette, and it's a very cool old clip, but you can't really understand it, you know. So a lot of times when you find those older clips, either you can't really tell who owns it or how you can get the rights for it, or they're not really usable. So we had to have clips that were a certain length. They had to be 15 to 30 seconds. They had to be in English. They had to be ones that we could get the rights for or that were in the public domain. So I know a lot about audio domain now from all this. Yeah. So it was a lot of work to narrow it down. And so we had to get, and I think we ended up with about 30 usable clips, but then we had to narrow that down by who we wanted to include, making sure we had diversity, making sure we could get permission to use the clips. So that was a whole thing.
No, that was basically why it was so hard to come up with all the women, even though we have literally thousands of women that inspire us. We had to narrow it down to the ones we had clips from, the ones who were speaking up to change the world too.
Yeah, and they had to make sense. Like you can't have a clip of Jane Goodall talking about what she ate for breakfast. It has to be about the environment, right?
Although I would like to know what she has for breakfast.
Same, I bet it would be interesting, but it had to be something that was going to be compelling in addition to meeting all those things. So that was kind of the structure and the stricture that we had that you wouldn't have writing a different kind of book.
And we wanted to have different kinds of women because women comes in all shapes and sizes. And we wanted to have women from different areas, like women in sports, women in science, women in politics. And we also wanted to have some women that people didn't know. So we wanted famous women, but we also wanted to highlight women that should be known, and maybe we can do our part to uplift them.
Yeah, like we always knew from the beginning that Malala Yousafzai was going to be on this book. In fact, I think when David first pitched it to us, he said, it's going to be for women like Malala. So she was kind of the example. But then we wanted to have other women, like Manuela said, that maybe are a little less known, or maybe you've heard of, but you didn't know much about them, and you could find out more about them.
And Familias was amazing because they gave us all the freedom to just choose whoever inspired us, whoever we thought needed to be heard. It was really great.
Yeah. And we wanted to make sure we had a lot of diversity. You know, we wanted to have all different voices, all different backgrounds. You know, we have people with disabilities, we have LGBTQ representation, we have all kinds of representation here, which we're very proud of. We have American women, non-American women, we have all kinds here. So.
Yeah, we wanted to have more international women, but the fact that the clips had to be in English made it harder.
Yeah.
But it's possible.
But we have a few. We have quite a few.
Yeah.
let's see. Oh, I guess next we should talk about our collaborative process, because as I mentioned, I live in Baltimore, Maryland, and Manuela lives in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. So obviously we are writing from two different hemispheres, which is something we've been doing for a really long time. So some of the tools we use were video chat, Google Docs, shared documents. We would generally meet kind of at the beginning of the process and make a plan. We definitely split them up. There are 14 profiles, so we split them up and we each researched 7, and then we would get together and edit. So honestly now, other than the few that I know she did, Shirley Chisholm, because she always tells that story, but other than the few like that, I couldn't tell you who drafted which ones, because we worked together so much in editing them. We would always get on a video call and just edit together and really refine the voice. And I'm so proud of some of those edits. There's still sentences I remember, and just the way that we did things. Like, I'll give the example of the Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor. What everybody knows about her is she was the first Latina Supreme Court Justice, which is true, but that is far from the most interesting thing about her. The most interesting thing about her is she is the most qualified justice in more than a century to be nominated to the Supreme Court. And that always gets overshadowed by the fact that she's the first Latina Supreme Court Justice. So those are the kinds of things that come up when we're editing and we change things around. So we changed that sentence to, where is it? In 2009, Sonia became the most experienced trial judge in a century to hold a seat on the US Supreme Court, as well as only the third woman and the first Hispanic American person. So
the focus where it should be.
Yeah. So in that editing process, we really challenge each other's assumptions. And I appreciate that so much. And because we've worked together for so long, we don't take it personally. We really are pretty straightforward and blunt with each other, and it's just a great process. I'm trying to think, is there anything else about our collaborative process?
What I love about our process is that because we're writing about women who accomplished things and who spoke up, it's very close to our hearts because it's what we've been trying to do. So sometimes it's very much therapy. It's very much, we end up talking about what's important and how those women are inspiring to us, how we wish we could be more like them, what they did that impressed us, and how we can put that in the text in like a nuanced way, subtle way. So I love it that it always turns into a conversation about being a woman and how we can get through and thrive. And I love that this book does this for me to this day. Like the fact that I think someone asked how important it is to have the voices of the women here. And I think it's so important. We were talking about how the book works for all ages, but it really works for adults, because as an adult, I think the fact that I have this box that has the voices of inspiring women that said something that matters, and now I can have their speeches to inspire me at the touch of a button when I'm feeling down. It's important to me to this day. I feel like I'm really proud of this book.
Yeah. I'm very proud of this book as well. And like you said, I think it does really appeal to a broad age range. And I've had adults tell me, I've heard of some of these women, but I realized I've never heard their voices. Even women Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune, who was an activist and an advisor to 5 presidents, and involved in the civil rights movement. And of course, when did she die? Let me check here. She died in 1955. She was born in 1875. And you can also, because of the way we've organized the clips, we kind of organize them roughly chronologically. We decided not to go by birth date or death date, but really when these women were kind of doing their most important work. So that's kind of how we organized it. So you could kind of see them through time, but you can also kind of hear the differences in the way people speak. In fact, would you mind playing the Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune clip so they can hear?
This is the very first one in the book.
And it's from 1955. Sorry, it's from 1955, shortly before she died. Go ahead.
By the way, if you press it again, if you press this, but a lot of people ask this, if you press the button and the woman's talking, you just press it again and it stops.
Really good to know when you've got a kid with a loud book.
Yes. So this is the first one we've got.
Doing away with the things that have tended to keep us apart. And building more solidly the bridge that we can walk over all types of difficulties and bring into action that brotherhood, that fellowship that the world needs today.
Just the cadence of her voice is
Yes.
so, yeah.
And while we're talking about the sound, I'll also mention that when you buy the book, it comes, you've probably seen this with other toys too and things. It has a little, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little plastic tab that comes in the battery. So I know a lot of folks who will take that and tape it to the back of the book so that, you know, if it's bedtime, you can put that back in and you can put the book to bed.
That's a very important tip.
Let's see. So another question that some folks had for us is, from where do you both draw your inspiration? Where do you draw your inspiration from, Manuela?
Oh God, it's really hard. Sometimes it's from real life and things that happen, music, books, of course. From our conversations, I feel like having important conversations with your friends. Sometimes we're just like, oh, how are you? What are you doing? I feel like sometimes we can ask our friends like philosophical questions. Just what is that is actually like the questions that we ask in this book is the type of questions that are inspiring to me. Like,
Yeah.
what do you value? What would you fight for? What would you like? What kind of risks would you run for what you believe in? Sometimes we
Yeah.
don't know that about our own friends.
That's true.
And I feel like it's really important to have these conversations. And
Yeah. I think that's interesting that you say that. I think even though you and I don't see each other every day, I mean, we text all the time, but we don't necessarily see each other every day, but I feel like we're very close. And I know a lot about you because we have had those deep conversations as an offshoot of our writing. And, you know, there's probably people I see every day that I don't necessarily feel as close to because we don't talk that deeply about things.
yeah, when you write and when you show your writing to people, that's what you're showing them. You're showing your soul, you're showing what you believe
true.
in, what you would fight for. So I feel like
In ASL, we'd say it like this:
oh,
giving
I
your heart,
love
giving
it.
your soul. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah. And I feel like if you know how to access that, if you have friends you can have those conversations with, it gets easier to put it in your writing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think when people ask, where do you get your ideas from? Where do you get inspiration from? I'm like, where don't I get them from? I feel like they come, that's really what art is. It's taking the things that are out there and connecting them in new ways. And, you know, it might be just because you happen to see a butterfly on a zebra. So now you've got an idea for a picture book about butterflies and zebras. Or I always think of the famous story with E.L. Konigsberg, who was inspired to write from the mixed up files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler, because she went to the Museum of Modern Art? Yeah, I think that's the book. That's the museum in the book. And maybe it's a different museum. If somebody remembers the museum, put it in the chat because I can't remember it off the top of my head. And that's going to bother me. I'm a librarian. I like to get my facts right. But anyway, she was at the museum and there was this antique chair and it had, you know, a ribbon over it so you couldn't approach it. And there was a single piece of popcorn on the chair. And she had the idea of, where did that come from? So she wrote this whole story of these two kids who ran away to live in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. That's what it is. I got it now. So, you know, ideas can come from anywhere. And I think when you have a co-author, critique partner, you know, have kind of a partner in creativity who, like we have, they just inspire each other. And, you know, there's so many, like I remember vividly when I was writing the jacket copy for this book, Dagger and Coin, which by the way is dedicated to Manuela. And she of course
Such a good book too.
Thank you. She of course had helped and, you know, critiqued various drafts of it and, you know, listened to me talk about it. And I talked through a lot of it with her. And you may not know, but when you get marketing copy, typically somebody at the publisher writes the marketing copy and they send it to the author and the author can give suggestions. So that would be, you know, the thing that's in the jacket. And I got it and I was like, okay, this is fine. And I was just texting her about it. I didn't intend to rewrite it, but over the course of like half an hour and a million texts back and forth, we ended up completely rewriting it. And I was so thrilled with it when we were done. And there were so many ideas in there that I never would have thought of on my own. But because we were kind of bouncing off of each other.
And we did it over text message on our phones.
I still have it. I still have it saved somewhere. One day I'm going to do a workshop about the collaborative process and pull that up as an example, because it feels like magic when you've got that pinging back and forth like that. Oh my. So let's see. I saw we have a couple other questions here, but if anybody has questions, please put them in the Q&A or put them in the chat. We'd love to address whatever questions you have. But in the meantime, I'm going to ask you a question, Manuela. I'm going to say, what else do you write? Tell us about the other stuff that you're working on.
Oh, I'm actually a screenwriter here in Brazil. And I've written all sorts of things. Comedies, romantic comedies. Lately, I've been writing like a lot of heavy dramas. Right now, I'm writing a thriller, one of the like thriller about women and about oppression. I can't speak too much about it, but I'm excited. It has murder in it. You shouldn't let your kids watch it. I hope we can. And also, Kathy and I are working on a project that we can talk about, but it's
about amazing women.
It is.
And hopefully we'll be able to say more soon. But yeah. So right now, Kathy, I'm working on, I just finished a middle grade fantasy novel, which is currently with my agent, and hopefully will be seeing the light of day soon. And I am working on a nonfiction project about cats, which is super fun.
Awesome.
So I do a little bit of everything. I do fiction, nonfiction, middle grade, young adult picture books. Yeah, keeps me busy. Let's see. Who are some of the other? Oh yeah.
Yeah. No, I was gonna ask you exactly that. Like,
oh,
we were talking about like all the women that we couldn't include and how many women inspire us. And I wanted to ask you, like, what women inspire you? What are some of the women?
Some of the women who inspire me. Well, a lot of you inspire me, definitely. But yeah, there's a lot of women in my life, you know, who may not be famous, but definitely inspire me. My mother, the protagonist of my first novel, is definitely based on my mother. She didn't believe it when I told her that, you know, one of the characters was based on her, and she said, "Oh, was it kind of the snobby one?" I said, "You don't think it was the quietly brave protagonist, perhaps?" And yeah, that just shows that we don't always see how we inspire other people. But as far as other women who inspire me, my goodness. So one of my big inspirations right now is Judy Heumann, who's a disability rights activist. She's just, if you've seen the movie Crip Camp on Netflix, you've met Judy, and she's just amazing. And she was paralyzed from polio as a young child, and her mother fought for her to get an education. She fought the state of New York to be licensed as a teacher because they wouldn't give her a license because she was in a wheelchair. She led the sit-ins in the San Francisco Health, Education, and Welfare Office to get the, what do they call, the regulations to enforce the Rehabilitation Act, which required that organizations provide access for people with disabilities if they get federal funding. And she led this 28-day sit-in. She's just amazing. So she's one of my big inspirations right now. Gosh, so there's so many women. There's so many women. And there's so, you know, we hear about the ones who are the firsts, but there's so many ongoing. Another woman who really inspires me is Kitty O'Neill. In fact, Manuela and I just recently wrote an article for the Familius Habit Hub, the blog, about 5 women that you and your children should know about. And we particularly wanted to pick women that we couldn't put in the book because we didn't have clips for them, but women that we thought were, you know, underrepresented. And a lot of people don't know who Kitty O'Neill is. She was a stunt woman and daredevil in the 1970s. She worked on Wonder Woman and the Bionic Woman. She was deaf, and she was this incredibly prolific stunt woman. She actually set the land speed record for women, and it wasn't, I forget what year, it was in the 70s that she set the record, and it wasn't broken until a couple of years ago. Just this really incredibly badass woman. So How about you? Tell us who inspires you.
It's funny that you're talking about a blog post, because one of the women that has been inspiring me so much lately is one that I put in that blog post. It was great because we didn't need audio, so we could have like women, that Brazilian women that I so wanted to include. And one of them is Elsa Soraris. She died recently. She was in her 90s, but she was a Brazilian singer that she just went through so much in her life. She was born in the slums, which is the favelas here in Rio. She was forced into marriage when she was 12. She had children when she wasn't even her children died because her body wasn't ready to have children because she was so young. And she was super poor, so she went on a radio show to try to win a competition to be able to buy medicine for her children. And she was such a powerhouse that she became like a super important singer, even though Brazil is also racist, and she was a Black woman. But she went through so much trial and tribulation, and in her 90s she was still like singing and talking about social issues and bringing up feminism and talking about like civil rights in her 90s. And she was like working with young artists, and she had a video game about her that she was amazing. Just read about her in the blog post. She's awesome.
So I see we have a question in the chat, and I think this would probably be a good one to end with, unless we have other questions. But the question is, do you have words of advice or inspiration for your young female readers?
That is.
I guess I would say, don't let anyone silence your voice. You have the right to speak up. Yeah. That's something that the world tries to tell women they don't have, but you have the right to speak up, and the words are yours, and no one can take them away from you. And speak up, even if your voice shakes, right?
Even if your voice shakes. And I would say also protect other people's right to speak. Like, listen to them. Don't let other people silence them, because sometimes people don't have the strength to stand up for themselves, but they should be heard. So if you can, like, try to lift up other women, other people who you feel are being silenced, no matter who they are. And also, like, find community, find other people who inspire you, try to inspire other people, because when we speak up together, our voices are so much louder and it's harder to ignore us. So it's important to work together.
Well said. Well, thank you for being here with us, everyone. And don't forget to check out She Spoke, 14 Women Who Raised Their Voices and Changed the World.
It's so pretty.
It's so pretty.
We can say this because we didn't draw it.
Exactly. That's one of the wonderful things about being an author and not an illustrator. You can just love on the book without bragging. Well, thank you, everyone, for being here with us, and keep speaking up.
Yes.
If you liked this webinar, go to familius.com for books, articles, and more content that will help your family be happy. Be sure to sign up for the Familius Habit Hub newsletter and be alerted when new webinars go live, because every family deserves to be happy.